Okay, we're going to move forward with our basic global editing. I want to just reiterate, right? The way that this stuff is laid out in Lightroom is pretty sequential in how you would do it, right? So we always want to move our way from basic, cropping, basic, all the way down. We will get a little bit out of order here in a little bit, but so far everything that I've showed you we're going to be doing in order. Detail is something that you're going to want to do kind of once you get all of your edits done. It's kind of like we're starting to put the final tweaks on our pictures. So I'm going to open the detail tab here. So what detail references is creating sharpness in our image. I want to be really clear here. You cannot make your photo more in focus. That is not what you're doing with detail. So with our raw edits, we're able to do things like change the white balance, change the exposure, just like if we were doing it in the camera. Right now, photographic technology and digital technology is not advanced enough to change focus. So if you took your photo out of focus, there is no fixing it. No amount of sharpening in Lightroom is going to save you. What sharpening does, though, is it creates the illusion that your photo is more in focus than it is. And it does that by increasing contrast from pixel to pixel. So we want to use sharpening, but we want to use it really, really in a nuanced way. It's the number one thing that I see people do to their photos that they kind of go overboard. They over sharpen their photos and they get like really pixely. So then I'll show you what an over sharpened image looks like. If we take a mount and just bumped it up all the way, radius bump it up all the way, we end up with this like real, it's what photographers call crispy photos. So let me zoom in. And you can start seeing that the image is made up of individual pixels. So let me go before, after. You see how that like crispiness, it's drawing attention to the hard edge of the pixel. So we don't want to do that. We want to use sharpening in a very, very nuanced way. I have rules for it. I usually sharpen with an amount. So the amount references how much you are actually sharpening the image, how much sharpness you're applying to the pixels across the whole image. And that goes from 0 to 150. I don't ever go below 20, and I don't ever really go above 100. My sharpening is always somewhere in there. Radius refers to how much you're applying that amount to. So what we're saying is, if we go a radius of 1, it's applying this same amount, 47%, on every single pixel. If we go half, it's only applying it to half the pixel. Anything above 1, and it's going to start compounding those changes, right? So it's going to start spilling over from pixel to pixel. So with that said, I never bump radius above 1. I actually keep radius at 0.5. There's other photo teachers that might tell you to keep radius at 1 and the amount lesser than, say, 50. Now, I tend to split it up differently, where I go radius a half and my amount between 20 and 100. That's just based on the way I take photos and my personal preference. So I'm going to show you kind of how to cruise around and see your image. Right here we have this one-to-one preview window. That's showing you 100% zoom in to your image. You can grab this little bullseye guy here and float it around the image and pick different areas of the image to view in that. We can click and drop that cursor there, and then as we scroll around our image, it will stay locked in on that spot. We can also grab the little hot hand cursor and cruise through the image. So I'm going to actually just look at maybe the top of this cactus, something right there. So we see if I go 100%, it gets a little crazy looking. It's a little bit too realistic for me. So I'm going to bump her down to, remember I'm keeping my radius at 0.5. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go before and after by turning the detailed panel off and on. And I know that you guys watching this video that's hosted through YouTube, probably you're not seeing these changes, but you're going to trust that I'm just seeing this little bit of change, this little bit of sharpness that coming back to the image. The other thing that you can always do is you can always hold down the option button. Now I think this is kind of weird. So if you hold down the option and you change the amount, it switches your photo into black and white. I guess the developers of Lightroom just said that's a way that you can just focus on the detail as opposed to, not being consumed with just paying attention to the color. I don't know, but you can option all of these, and it'll show you how you're changing. So radius, if we bump radius up, we see how much it's changing when we put that mask, the option mask on. So that's just holding the option mask down, or the option button, I'm sorry. Same thing with detail. So if we hold down option, it'll show you how you're applying that information. I try to don't even really mess with detail. It's just another way of refining the amount and radius. It's a little bit excessive. Masking, though, I think is pretty important. So if we mask it all the way to 100, it's going to apply the sharpening only to those white areas. So only to the really hard edges, right? So the hard edges of those ocotillos and the hard edge of the horizon, it's applying the sharpness right there. Where if we bump the masking down even less, it's applying all of that sharpening to everything. So I think that when you're using sharpening, if you're taking portraits, you kind of don't, you want to mask it a little bit more, because you don't want there to be these really hard edges, right? Because you don't want there to be hard edges in somebody's face, like, you know, looking at their wrinkles. But if we were doing something like architectural photography, where there's these hard lines of a building, you might want to mask it more so it's only on the hard edges. I tend to fall somewhere in the middle, and it's a pretty subtle thing. I mean, you know, this stuff is pretty a pretty nuanced way of editing your photos. You guys are paying attention to like photo editing in this course way more than anybody, you know, 99.9% of people think about it on the planet. But, you know, if I zoom into this picture, I just want to show you a before and after with my amount at 77, radius at 0.5, I skip detail, and masking at 64. So here's after, here's before. We can tell that it has a little bit more pop to it, and I'm not just talking about the color pop from those adjustments, I'm talking about the sharpness, and I'm hoping you guys can see that through this YouTube video. So that is the detail tab. I think it's really important, a really important edit to do is just kind of sharpen up your image a little bit. Now I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about how to, I'm going to go back to my library tab, how to get the noise out of an image. So you guys have been making photos for a while now, and if you go and take your camera and take photos at night, you are going to have long exposures. And long exposures, or you're going to be using slow shutter speed. So I'm trying to find a photo right here that needs a little bit of noise reduction. Because what we're going to learn right now is how to get the noise out of your pictures. So I'm going to open this picture up in the Develop tab. So this is a picture that I took on ISO 4000 in my studio. So it has some digital noise in it. Let's zoom in, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with digital noise. Digital noise is this little like grainy pattern. So a lot isn't known about digital noise. There's a little bit known, but a lot of the stuff is left up to assumptions. So digital noise is created by either really high ISOs or really long exposure times. And when I say really long, I mean kind of anything over like half a second. You'll start getting digital noise. Because what happens is your sensor gets hot. The longer that your aperture is open when you're taking a long exposure, your sensor heats up and you end up getting these like little color noises. So those are the two ways that you end up with digital noise. This is not, right, this is not the fault of the photographer. It's kind of the limitations of the equipment. So where it would be the fault of the photographer is if you were outside in the middle of the day taking a photo like this one, and there was digital noise in it. Because there's no reason to have a long exposure or a high ISO in this case. Where, in this case, in my studio with most of the lights off, I kind of needed to use a really high ISO or a really long exposure time. So there's two different types of noise. There's luminance noise and color noise. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm kind of taking a stab in the dark here, but based on my experimentation with it, I think that luminance noise is the dominant type of noise that we find in our pictures, and I think that that's usually caused by high ISO. Color noise is less dominating in our photos, but I think that that's what's caused by really long exposure times. Usually, though, we're going to have to measure both of these things to get what we want, right? Where it's usually not one or the other, it's usually a combination of luminance and color. So, a thing to know about noise reduction is it comes at a cost. That cost is detail, right? So we just went through the sharpening and the detail panel. So when we're getting rid of noise, what we're doing is we're taking some of the detail, the sharpening, out of the photo. So what we're going to do is we're always going to be measuring those two things. How much noise reduction we're doing and how much detail we're losing. Okay? So I always start with luminance noise because, like I said, I think that it's the dominant type of noise. And I'm going to grab my little preview window here, and I'm going to go back on this wall in the back of my studio. And I'm going to zoom out of this window and look at this window right here. And I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to start adjusting the luminance. So if I go all the way to 100, it will definitely get rid of the noise, but now I have this like weird painterly looking photo. It looks like a painting now. That's not what we want, right? We got rid of the noise, but now we have this like mushy, unsharp image. So we usually want to start with just, small little jumps in luminance. So let's just go to like 20. Okay, so if I zoom in, and I'm going to go before and after. So this is after, that's before. Let me turn these clipping masks off here. So before, after. I think I could take a little bit more out. I'm going to say at 45. Let's see what we do there. So I'm looking at the text on this air compressor right here. I can still read that it says 100 right there. Before and after. So that actually did a pretty good job of getting rid of that luminance noise. I'm going to kind of mess around with the detail a little bit. If I bring the detail down, take all the detail out, I'm kind of getting this like painterly look again. So I'm going to bump the detail up a little bit. All right, now I see that I'm back. I actually like how that looks right there. I don't ever mess with contrast. I'm sure there's somebody way smarter than me that can tell you why you would do that. I don't mess with it there. So now let's go down to color, because like I said, it's usually 80% of it is going to be luminance, 20% is going to be color, but you kind of want to adjust both of them. So I'm going to bump up the color here to 50. Let's go before and after. Remember, I'm just using the backslash key. So before and after, I am losing a little bit of sharpness, but it's at the cost of getting rid of that noise. Detail, let's bump up a little bit, or actually let's bump down a little bit. Let's see. That looks pretty good to me. So if you guys look up here in this area, just watch the noise. Right there, there's noise. Right there, it smooths it out quite a bit. And then smoothness is just a way of kind of blending those pixels. Once again, it's coming at a cost, right? It's coming at getting the sharpness out of your image. So I'm just doing a little at a time. Let me zoom out of my picture here. Now my picture doesn't look super painterly, but it also doesn't look super noisy. So that's before, that's after. I think that looks pretty good to me. I might have taken it a little bit too far, so I'm going to back off the color noise a little bit, back off the luminance noise a little bit. Before, after. And now I got rid of that noise. So this is the only place that you can get rid of digital noise. So this is definitely the place that you'd want to do it. And I try to, right, look how much it gets rid of it here. Look how textured this is right here. That's before, that's after. Before, after. So, right, this is not completely gone, but it's minimized to a point, and our photo is still sharp enough that, right, I can read the words on my printer. It's not just like mushy text. So I think that's a really useful tool, is the sharpening tool and the noise reduction. But they both, I can't stress this enough, they both need to be used very, very delicately. You don't want to apply these things like spray paint. You want to be real light-handed with them. Okay, so I'll see you in our last global editing video in a moment.